That bag is too big for the cabin.
Now! This is
People like you
unacceptable
always think
behavior.
rules don't apply. The words sliced through the humid air of
you need to place your
Hartsfield-Jackson
paw on my
Atlanta
bag.
International Airport's Terminal B, like a blade sharp and intentional. Jasmine Reynolds felt them hit her body before her mind fully registered their meaning. Her heartbeat instantly accelerated. Her breath caught in her throat.
We move forward with the reform
her skin
implementation. It's
prickling
crucial
with
that we
sudden
align our
heat
strategies with the
despite
latest market
aggressive air
trends and
conditioning.
Q3 projections.
The words weren't whispered. They were projected, meant to be heard by everyone in line, meant to
You need to
embarrass.
leave now!
The
This is
voice belonged to
unacceptable behavior.
Veronica Palmer, senior flight attendant for SkyWing Airlines, whose tight-lipped smile never reached her pale blue eyes as she stared down at 19-year-old Jasmine. Just moments earlier, Veronica had waved through a young blonde woman carrying two bags nearly identical in size to Jasmine's with a warm, "Have a wonderful flight, sweetheart." The contrast wasn't subtle. It was deliberate, a performance of power played out daily at gates across the country. Before we dive deeper into what happens next in this true story of power, prejudice, and justice, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in accountability and fairness in how people are treated, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. What happens in the next 23 minutes will change lives forever, expose a broken culture, and remind us all that sometimes justice arrives wearing an unexpected face. Jasmine Reynolds stood at the front of the boarding line, her Stanford University hoodie zipped up against the aggressive air conditioning. At 19, she was navigating the tail end of grueling midterm exams and the bone-deep exhaustion that came with them. All she wanted was to board SkyWing Airlines Flight 835, sink into her premium economy seat, and sleep until the wheels touched down in San Francisco. She was unassuming in her appearance, a stark contrast to the polished business travelers and Instagram-ready influencers surrounding her. Faded jeans, worn sneakers, and expensive noise-canceling headphones draped around her neck were her travel uniform. In one hand, she clutched her phone displaying her boarding pass. On her shoulder hung her backpack, and in her other hand, she held a simple dark green tote bag that contained her laptop textbook and a small pill case with her anxiety medication. Jasmine was no stranger to air travel. Her father had instilled in her a methodical approach to navigating airports since she was old enough to carry her own bag. She knew the rules, not just the ones posted on signs, but the unspoken ones too. Keep moving. Don't hold up lines. Be prepared. Respect space. She'd flown this route between Stanford and home at least 12 times in the past year alone. The line for Group 3 boarding began to move. Jasmine shuffled forward, her gaze fixed on the jet bridge, the gateway to 5 hours of blessed quiet and the warmth of home. The passengers ahead of her passed through without incident. A businessman with a rolling suitcase nearly identical to her backpack, an older white couple with matching neck pillows, a young white woman with two bags similar to Jasmine's own setup. And then she was at the front boarding pass, ready on her phone. "Boarding pass," a sharp voice commanded. Jasmine looked up, offering a polite, tired smile to the flight attendant scanning tickets. The woman's name tag read Veronica Palmer. "Good afternoon," Jasmine said, holding out her phone. But politeness, it seemed, was not going to be enough today. Veronica Palmer looked to be in her late 40s, with a blonde bob cut so precise it seemed to form a helmet around her face held rigid with hairspray. She wore the SkyWing uniform, navy blue with red accents, with additional flourishes not part of the standard issue. A decorative scarf knotted just so, 3 gold bracelets that clinked as she moved her wrist, and a pin collection that suggested years of service but had begun to weigh down her lapel like small medals of honor. Her eyes, a pale, judgmental blue, didn't scan Jasmine. They inspected her, lingering with obvious disapproval on her hoodie, her jeans, her simple appearance. Those eyes narrowed slightly as they moved from Jasmine's face to her bags, a micro-expression of decision forming before she'd even checked the boarding pass. There was something in that gaze that suggested Jasmine had already committed an offense simply by standing there. Veronica had been with SkyWing for 24 years. She'd started back when the airline was still called Coastal Pacific, before the merger, before the rebranding. She'd served drinks to senators once to a minor celebrity and had developed what she considered an infallible instinct for trouble. In her 2 decades of service, she'd seen the industry change, her authority diminish, and younger flight attendants, with less experience and less dedication, promoted above her. 3 months earlier, Veronica had been passed over for the senior cabin manager position she'd coveted. The role had gone to Derek Foster, 15 years her junior, with half her experience. The official reason was his fresh perspective and innovative approach to customer care. The unofficial reason, which she suspected but couldn't prove, was that the airline wanted younger faces in leadership roles. Since then, a coldness had settled into Veronica's customer interactions. Her once professional demeanor had calcified into something harder, more brittle, ready to crack at the slightest pressure. She'd begun to see every interaction as a test of her remaining authority, a chance to prove her indispensability through rigid enforcement of rules, both real and imagined. Veronica scanned Jasmine's phone. Beep. Her eyes narrowed slightly, a small frown forming at the corners of her mouth. Jasmine Reynolds. Premium economy. Window seat. And then her gaze dropped to Jasmine's bags, her lips thinning into a line of disapproval so practiced it seemed permanent. You have too many items, Veronica said, her voice flat and loud enough for the people behind Jasmine to hear. You're only allowed 1 personal item and 1 carry-on. Jasmine blinked, momentarily confused. She gestured to her backpack and tote. This is my carry-on, and this is my personal item, she explained calmly. The tote fits under the seat. I've flown with this same setup dozens of times. Veronica's smile was a thin, unpleasant line. I'm sure you have. But today on my flight, that tote is too large to be a personal item. You're holding up the line, miss. Step aside and we'll have the gate agent check it for you. But it's not too large, Jasmine insisted, trying to keep her voice even. The frustration of exams and fatigue was making her patience thin. Look, it has my laptop and medication in it. It's a standard laptop bag. It fits perfectly in the sizer. To prove her point, Jasmine turned to the metal baggage sizer next to the counter and dropped her tote bag into the personal item slot. It slid in with inches to spare. She looked back at Veronica, expecting a resigned wave on. Instead, Veronica's face hardened. The blue eyes turned to ice. She saw Jasmine's demonstration not as proof, but as defiance, a public challenge to her authority that could not go unanswered. Ma'am, I am the senior crew member on this flight, Veronica said, her voice dropping into a low, threatening monotone. The sizers are a guide. I make the final determination, and I determine that bag is not compliant. Now, are you going to step aside and check the bag, or are you refusing a flight crew instruction? The shift in language was immediate and terrifying. Refusing instruction was a trigger phrase, one that moved a passenger from annoying to security risk. Jasmine felt a cold wave of anxiety wash over her, her palms suddenly clammy against the strap of her tote. I'm not refusing anything, Jasmine said, her heart starting to pound so loudly she wondered if others could hear it. She could feel the stares of the other passengers. I'm just trying to explain that my bag follows the rules. I don't want to check it. My laptop and medication are in there. Everyone says that Veronica scoffed, her eyes flicking to a white businessman behind Jasmine who was now checking his watch impatiently. We have a schedule to maintain. She turned and snapped her fingers at the gate agent, a younger man who was handling the computer. Alex, this passenger is refusing to comply. She's holding up boarding. Call the supervisor. Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to center herself the way her father had taught her. The airline's own policy states that medications must remain with passengers and should not be checked. Veronica's eyes narrowed. Are you telling me how to do my job? No, I'm just... Because it sounds like you're telling me how to do my job. Veronica leaned forward slightly, her voice lowered but still audible to those nearby. And you don't look like someone who knows anything about airline operations? The implication hung in the air, unmistakable in its prejudice. Alex Ramirez had been a gate agent for SkyWing Airlines for just under 7 months. At 25, with a hospitality degree and aspirations to eventually move into corporate, he was still learning the complex choreography of airport operations. His training had emphasized 2 contradicting priorities: customer satisfaction and on-time departures. When those 2 collided, as they often did, he found himself in a no-win situation. He was also on probation, 2 more months before his position became permanent with benefits and security. 2 more months of walking the knife edge of pleasing difficult colleagues while still doing what he knew was right. Watching the interaction between Veronica and the young passenger, Alex felt a familiar knot form in his stomach. He'd seen Veronica operate before. 3 weeks earlier, she'd reduced a grandmother to tears over a carry-on weight discrepancy. 2 days ago, she'd made a fuss about a man's service animal documentation that had delayed boarding by 18 minutes. Veronica, maybe we can just... Alex began, his voice soft and uncertain. Are you undermining my authority? Alex? Veronica snapped, her voice sharp as a blade. She's being belligerent. Call the supervisor or I'll call the captain and report you both. The threat hung in the air. Alex knew what it meant. Complaints from senior crew members went into permanent files. Permanent files determined who stayed and who went when positions were cut. With 2 months left on probation, he couldn't afford that risk. Alex fumbled for his radio, his face flushing with embarrassment and suppressed anger. He caught Jasmine's eye briefly, a silent apology in his glance. Behind Jasmine, the line of Group 3 passengers was growing restless. Some were openly watching the confrontation, others pretending to be absorbed in their phones while stealing glances. A few had begun to record discreetly, sensing something newsworthy unfolding. "This is ridiculous." A woman's voice rose from 3 people back in line. Elaine Fisher, 62, a retired teacher from Minneapolis in a pink tracksuit, stepped slightly out of line. Her kind face was set with the determined expression that had faced down generations of misbehaving high schoolers. "That bag clearly fits in the sizer. We all saw it." "Ma'am, please stay in line," Veronica said coldly. "This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us if we're being delayed for no reason." Elaine persisted, her voice carrying the natural authority of decades in the classroom. "The young lady's bag fits the requirements. I'm watching this happen, and I don't like what I'm seeing." From further back, a man in a crisp business suit checked his watch impatiently. "Just check the bag, kid. Some of us have connections to make." Richard Gonzalez, 44 management consultant, was on his 3rd flight of the day. His patience had evaporated somewhere over Chicago. He didn't particularly care about the specifics of the situation. He just wanted to get to his seat and close his eyes for a few precious minutes before diving into the presentation he needed to review. "Sir, I can't check this bag," Jasmine tried to explain, turning slightly. "My medication." "Then just do whatever she says," Richard interrupted, gesturing at Veronica. "It's not worth missing a connection over." The gate supervisor, Thomas Wilson, 38, with thinning hair and perpetually worried eyes, arrived at the gate podium slightly out of breath. He'd been dealing with a wheelchair assistance issue at the neighboring gate. "What's the problem here?" Veronica Thomas asked, his eyes darting between the stern-faced flight attendant and the young woman in the hoodie. This passenger, Veronica, began pointing at Jasmine as if she were a piece of evidence is refusing to check her non-compliant second carry-on. "I gave her a direct instruction, and she became argumentative and belligerent, holding up the entire boarding process. She's creating a disturbance." Belligerent Jasmine's voice cracked in disbelief. "I was not. I just showed you it fits in the sizer. My medication is in that bag." "See," Veronica said to Thomas, her arms crossed. Defiant, uncooperative. "At this point, I don't feel comfortable with her on my aircraft. She's already demonstrating hostile behavior before we've even left the gate." Thomas looked at Jasmine, his expression pleading. "Miss, it's just a bag. Can't you just check it? We need to get this flight out. We're already looking at a 15-minute delay because of this. It's not just a bag." Jasmine insisted, her frustration boiling over into tears she refused to let fall. Her chest felt tight, her throat constricting with the effort of maintaining composure. "It's my laptop, my notes, my anxiety medication. I am not allowed to check it." "Your own airline policy says medication must be kept in the cabin." She was right, and she knew she was right. But Veronica had moved the goalposts. This was no longer about a bag. It was about authority. "She's citing policy to me," Veronica said with a humorless laugh, her eyes glittering with a vindictive light. She looked at Thomas. "This is what I'm talking about. She's clearly looking for a confrontation. I've been with SkyWing for 24 years. I know a problem passenger when I see one. She is a security risk. A security risk." Jasmine was now raising her voice, her composure shattered. "Because of a tote bag. This is insane. You're discriminating against me." "Oh, here we go." Veronica rolled her eyes dramatically, turning to the watching passengers. "Now she's playing the card. They always do." The comment hung in the air like a slap. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered, "Did she really just say that?" A few more phones rose now, recording openly. Elaine, the woman in the pink tracksuit, spoke up again. "She's right. You know that's a personal item. You're just bullying her because you think you can get away with it." "Ma'am, please stay out of this." Thomas urged, his forehead beating with sweat. "I will not," Elaine replied firmly. "I taught high school for 38 years. I know what bullying looks like. I know what prejudice looks like too. And I'm seeing both right now." "That's absurd," Veronica snapped, but a flush was creeping up her neck. Richard the businessman huffed in frustration. "For God's sake, just check the bag, kid. We all want to get home." A younger woman, her phone clearly recording the scene, shook her head. "No. This is wrong. That's clearly a personal item. The same size as mine, which no one questioned." She held up a stylish tote, nearly identical in size to Jasmine's. The gate area was descending into chaos. Passengers were taking sides, voices rising, tension building like static electricity before a storm. Veronica, seeing her authority challenged by multiple passengers, tripled down. "That's it," she declared, her voice rising. "Thomas, she's uncooperative. She's accused me of a crime and she's causing a scene. She is not boarding this flight. Period." "You can't do that," Jasmine cried out, panic rising in her chest. "I absolutely can. And I am," Veronica set her face a mask of cold victory. "In fact, I don't want her in this gate area. She's a disturbance." She turned to Thomas, who looked sick. "Thomas, call airport police. Have her removed." "Police." Alex whispered, his face ashen. For refusing a crew instruction and becoming belligerent, Veronica corrected him loudly. "She is a threat. Get them here now." Thomas, trapped between a 24-year veteran flight attendant and an increasingly tense public confrontation, reluctantly made the call. 10 minutes later, 2 airport police officers arrived at Gate B-23. Officer James Barnes, 42, approached with the weary professionalism of someone who had seen too many airport disputes. Beside him, Officer Elena Lopez, 31, surveyed the scene with sharp eyes and a slight frown. "What seems to be the problem?" Officer Barnes asked, addressing his question to Thomas. Before the gate supervisor could answer, Veronica stepped forward. This passenger refused to comply with carry-on restrictions and became confrontational when instructed to check her oversized bag. When informed she would not be permitted to board with the non-compliant item, she became aggressive and disruptive, inciting other passengers. Officer Barnes turned to Jasmine. "Is that what happened?" Miss Jasmine, fighting to keep her voice steady, shook her head. Her hands trembled slightly, and she clasped them together to hide it. "No, my bag is compliant. It fits in the sizer." I showed her. "She's refusing to let me board because—" She hesitated, not wanting to explicitly name what was happening, but having no other explanation. "Because she decided she doesn't like me." "The passenger has made accusations of discrimination," Veronica added quickly, "which is completely unfounded. This is about compliance with safety regulations." Officer Lopez glanced at the green tote bag, then at the sizer, her eyes narrowing slightly. "May I?" she asked, reaching for the bag. Jasmine nodded, and Officer Lopez placed the bag in the sizer. It fit with room to spare. "The bag appears to be compliant with your stated dimensions," Officer Lopez noted, looking at Thomas. She turned to Veronica. "Ma'am, can you explain the specific safety concern with this bag?" "The sizer is a guide," Veronica insisted, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "Final determination rests with crew members. It's about total volume distribution of weight and safety considerations that aren't apparent from a simple measurement." "What specific safety consideration applies here?" Officer Lopez pressed. Veronica's mouth opened, then closed, unable to articulate an actual concern. Officer Barnes, clearly wanting to diffuse rather than inflame, turned to Jasmine. "What's in the bag that you can't check it?" "My laptop, my class notes from midterms, and my prescription medication." Jasmine explained, her voice steadier now that someone seemed to be listening. "Your airline's own policy states medications must remain with passengers in the cabin." "That's correct," Alex confirmed quietly, earning a glare from Veronica. Officer Barnes sighed. "Look, miss, I understand this is frustrating, but at this point the flight crew has made their decision. They have the authority to deny boarding if they believe there's an issue with compliance or behavior. So I'm being removed from a flight I paid for because my bag, which fits in your own sizer, is somehow non-compliant, even though it contains items. Your policy says I can't check." Jasmine's voice was rising again. "You're being removed because you've become disruptive," Veronica corrected. "Your behavior is the issue now." Several passengers had formed a small crowd. Elaine pushed forward. "Officers, I've been watching this entire interaction. This young woman has been nothing but polite until pushed well beyond what's reasonable. Ms. Palmer, on the other hand, has been openly hostile and made comments that sounded distinctly prejudiced to me." "Ma'am, please step back," Officer Barnes said. Officer Lopez was observing the scene carefully. "Is there a compromise available here? Perhaps the passenger could remove the medication and laptop, check the bag, and carry those items in a smaller container." Thomas brightened. "Yes, that would." "Absolutely not," Veronica interrupted. "She's already demonstrated she's unwilling to follow crew instructions. I don't want her on my flight." Jasmine stood still, a strange calm suddenly settling over her. She'd reached the end of reasonable options. With steady hands, she pulled out her phone. "I need to make a call," she said quietly. "To who?" "Your lawyer." Veronica scoffed. Jasmine didn't answer. She simply dialed her eyes, never leaving Veronica's face. "Dad," she said when the call connected. "I need you. Gate B23, right now." Her voice lowered but was still audible. "Yes." "It's happening again." Another pause. "No worse." "They've called the police." She could hear her father's sharp intake of breath, followed immediately by, "I'm on my way." 10 minutes, Max. Don't say anything else. Don't leave. I'm coming." She ended the call and slipped the phone into her pocket, a strange calm settling over her. The chaos of the gate area, the murmuring passengers, Veronica's rigid hostility, the uncertain officers seemed to recede. Jasmine had spent her life watching her father handle crises with a composed dignity that made others question themselves. Now she channeled that same energy. "Officers," she said calmly, "I'd appreciate if you could wait about 15 minutes before making any decisions. There's someone coming who can resolve this situation." Veronica's laugh was sharp dismissive. "We're not delaying an entire flight for your daddy to come argue with us, honey." The condescension in her voice was thick enough to cut. Officer Lopez studied Jasmine's face. Something about the young woman's confidence gave her pause. "Who exactly is coming?" she asked. "My father," Jasmine replied simply. "Dr. Anthony Reynolds." The name meant nothing to Veronica, who rolled her eyes dramatically. "Thomas, we need to complete boarding. Officers, please remove her from the gate area so we can proceed." Alex, the gate agent, had gone very still. His eyes widened as he looked at Jasmine with new understanding. His mouth opened slightly, then closed as realization dawned. "Thomas," he whispered urgently, tugging at the supervisor's sleeve. "I think we should wait." For what Veronica demanded irritation clear in her voice. Alex swallowed hard. "Because if she's talking about Dr. Anthony Reynolds, then we really need to wait." Thomas's face registered confusion, then shock, then something close to fear. "Dr. Reynolds, the Dr. Reynolds. I don't care if he's the surgeon." "General," Veronica snapped, "we have a schedule to maintain." Officer Lopez had caught the shift in energy. "Who is Dr. Reynolds?" she asked Alex directly. Before Alex could answer, Jasmine spoke, her voice quiet but perfectly audible in the suddenly hushed gate area. "He'll be here in about 10 minutes. She checked her watch. "You might want to prepare. Flight 835 to San Francisco will be delayed approximately 15 minutes. We apologize for the inconvenience." Thomas's voice crackled over the PA system, strained and slightly higher than normal. The crowd at gate B23 had grown. What had started as a simple boarding dispute had morphed into something else entirely, a piece of impromptu airport theater that passengers from neighboring gates were drifting over to witness. Phones recorded discreetly and not so discreetly. A few people were already posting to social media with captions like, "Drama at B23 and flight attendant power trip." Veronica stood rigid beside the gate podium, her face a mask of professional determination, undermined by the rapid tapping of her right foot. Every few seconds, she checked her watch, then glared at Jasmine as if the young woman's continued presence was a personal affront. "This is ridiculous," she hissed to Thomas. "We're delaying a flight of 183 passengers because one girl refuses to follow simple instructions." Thomas didn't meet her eyes. "Veronica, I think we should." "No," she cut him off sharply. "I've made my decision. The passenger is non-compliant and disruptive. She doesn't board. Period." She turned to Officer Barnes. "Officer, I insist you remove this passenger from the gate area immediately. She's deliberately disrupting our operations." Officer Barnes looked uncertain. The confrontation had shifted into something unfamiliar, and he sensed a political complexity that hadn't been apparent initially. "Ma'am, I think at this point, since the flight's already been announced as delayed, it makes sense to wait and see if this situation can be resolved without removal." "Whose side are you on?" Veronica demanded, her voice rising. "We're not on sides, ma'am. We're trying to resolve a situation." Jasmine remained where she had been standing, her green tote bag now clutched protectively against her chest. She hadn't said a word since ending the call, her eyes focused on the long concourse leading to the gate. Her outward calm belied the nervous energy coursing through her, the rapid pulse, the dry mouth, the slight tremor in her hands that she controlled by gripping the bag tighter. The restless energy of the crowd was shifting. What had been annoyed impatience was transforming into curious anticipation. Something was coming. Someone was coming. The narrative was changing in real time, and everyone sensed it. Elaine, the retired teacher, had positioned herself protectively near Jasmine. "You hanging in there, honey?" she asked softly. Jasmine nodded. "This happens more than you'd think," she whispered back. "But not for much longer." "I taught for almost 4 decades, Elaine replied. "I've seen this kind of thing too many times." "Stay strong." Richard Gonzalez, the businessman who had initially told Jasmine to just check the bag, was now checking his watch again with increasing agitation. "I'm going to miss my connection." "At this rate," he complained to no one in particular, "this is completely unprofessional. Maybe you should tell her to just comply with the actual rules." Then, another passenger replied pointedly, gesturing at Veronica. "Those aren't even the rules," someone else added. "The bag fit in the sizer. We all saw it. I've flown with bigger bags than that," a woman with a designer purse larger than Jasmine's tote commented. "Never had an issue." "Yeah, I wonder why," a voice muttered from the back, the implication clear in the tone. The murmurs were growing louder, the crowd's sympathies clearly shifting. Veronica could feel her control slipping away like sand through her fingers. Her authority, once absolute, was eroding with each passing minute. She turned to the officers again with increasing desperation. "This is becoming a security situation," she insisted, her voice tight. "You need to clear the area." Officer Lopez shook her head. "Ma'am, these are ticketed passengers waiting for a delayed flight. There's no security threat here." "Then remove her." Veronica pointed at Jasmine, her finger trembling slightly. "She's the cause of all this. I believe we've established that her bag is within the airline's stated size requirements." Officer Lopez replied calmly. "At this point, I'm not seeing grounds for removal." Veronica's face flushed dark red. "You don't understand. I'm the senior crew member on this flight," her voice rose. "I determine who boards and who doesn't, based on compliance with regulations," Officer Lopez countered. "Not personal preference." The tension was mounting by the second. Several more passengers had pulled out phones to record. Thomas looked like he might be sick. Alex stood frozen, his eyes darting between Veronica and the concourse. Suddenly, Officer Barnes straightened, his attention caught by something at the far end of the terminal. "Someone's coming," he said quietly to his partner. A ripple moved through the crowd. Something was happening at the far end of the concourse. People were turning to look. A few stepped aside, creating a small path. Jasmine checked her watch. 8 minutes, she said softly. "He's early." The crowd parted further as a tall figure in a charcoal suit strode purposefully down the concourse. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about his presence that made people instinctively move aside. Veronica, noticing the shift in attention, turned to look. "What now?" she snapped, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. The moment that had been building since Jasmine's call was finally arriving, and with it a reckoning that would change far more than just one flight. As the crowd at gate B-23 shifted its attention toward the far end of the concourse, Jasmine found her mind drifting back through the years to the lessons her father had taught her about navigating a world that didn't always see her clearly. She was 7 the first time it happened. Shopping with her father at an upscale electronics store, she'd wandered off to look at the newest tablets. A security guard had immediately approached, asking where her parents were, if she was lost, if she had wandered in from somewhere else. The questions had confused her until her father appeared dressed in a custom suit, his voice calm but edged with a familiar firmness. "She's with me," he'd said simply. The guard had apologized profusely once he realized who Anthony Reynolds was, not just any customer, but the CEO of a major tech consultancy firm that supplied the store's inventory management systems. Later in the car, seeing her confusion, Anthony had explained gently but honestly. "Jasmine, there will be times when people look at you and make assumptions based on nothing more than your appearance. When that happens, you have 3 choices. You can get angry, you can get sad, or you can get strategic." "What's strategic?" 7-year-old Jasmine had asked. "It means you think before you act. You consider what outcome you want, then choose the path most likely to get you there." He'd looked at her seriously. Getting angry might feel good in the moment, but it rarely changes minds. Getting sad only hurts you. Being strategic means maintaining your dignity while ensuring there are consequences for poor behavior. It became a recurring conversation as she grew older. At 12, when a teacher assumed she'd cheated on a test because her score was unexpectedly high. At 15, when a store clerk followed her through the aisles watching her every move. At 17, when she was applying to colleges and a guidance counselor suggested she set her sights lower despite her perfect GPA. Each time Anthony had been there not to fight her battles but to help her develop her own approach to injustice. Know the rules better than they do, he'd advised. Prepare more thoroughly. Speak calmly but firmly. Document everything. And when necessary, use the resources and privileges you have to create change, not just for yourself, but for others who might face the same situation without your advantages. Anthony Reynolds had raised Jasmine alone after her mother died of cancer when Jasmine was just 4. A brilliant engineer turned business leader, he'd built SkyWing Airlines from a regional carrier into a national powerhouse, all while making sure he never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference. What few people outside the company knew was that Anthony's mission with SkyWing had always been personal. He'd experienced so many humiliating moments as a passenger, being moved from first class, having his credentials questioned, being subjected to random additional screening, that he'd ultimately decided the only way to change air travel was to reinvent it from the inside. The incident that had finally pushed him to action happened when he was 34, already a successful tech entrepreneur. Flying first class from Chicago to San Francisco, he'd been asked to move to economy by a flight attendant who claimed his seat had been double booked, only to watch as a white passenger was escorted to his seat minutes later. When he'd questioned, the security had been called. The humiliation of being escorted off the plane while other passengers stared had stayed with him for years. "I bought that airline so no one would ever feel what I felt that day," he'd told Jasmine once. But changing a culture is harder than changing a company name. Never let them see you break, he'd taught Jasmine. Know your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. And remember that sometimes the most powerful response isn't a shout, but a whisper backed by action. Now, standing in the gate area with all eyes shifting between her and the approaching figure in the distance, Jasmine drew on those lessons. She unclenched her jaw. She relaxed her shoulders. She breathed deeply, centering herself for what was to come. The confrontation was no longer about her bag. It never really had been. It was about power and who wielded it, those who used it as a weapon versus those who used it as a tool for change. Jasmine checked her watch again. The moment of revelation was approaching, and despite everything, she felt a flash of sympathy for Veronica Palmer. The flight attendant truly had no idea what was about to hit her. Down the gleaming expanse of Terminal B's main concourse, a figure appeared. From a distance, there was nothing particularly remarkable about him, a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit, walking with purpose. Yet as he drew closer, the atmosphere in the terminal subtly shifted. It wasn't just his appearance, though, that was striking enough. Dr. Anthony Reynolds moved with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to demand attention because it was naturally given. At 52, his closely cropped salt and pepper hair and trim physique suggested discipline. His face, with its strong jawline and thoughtful eyes, projected both intelligence and intensity. But it was the way others reacted to him that truly revealed his presence. A pilot passing in the opposite direction did a double-take, then straightened almost imperceptibly. A gate agent at B-21 nudged her colleague, both watching as he passed. The barista at the coffee kiosk paused mid-pour, recognition dawning on her face. As he approached, the fluorescent lighting caught the deep burgundy of his tie, SkyWing's signature color, and the subtle airline logo pin on his lapel, the only outward signs of his connection to the company. But it was enough for those who knew. Each step brought ripples of recognition through the terminal staff, a wave of awareness that preceded him like an invisible herald. Anthony Reynolds didn't look like what most people expected of an airline CEO. There was no entourage, no security detail, no flashy accessories signaling wealth or status. Just a man in a well-made suit, carrying a leather portfolio, moving with the efficiency of someone who valued time, his own and others. His eyes, so like his daughter's, scanned the concourse ahead, quickly locating gate B23 and the unusual crowd gathered there. His pace never faltered, but those watching closely might have noticed a slight tightening of his jaw, the only outward sign of the anger building within him. As he approached gate B23, the crowd parted instinctively, creating a path without being asked. Faces turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Phones were raised, recording discreetly and not so discreetly. The air itself seemed to change, charged with anticipation. Veronica, still arguing with Officer Lopez, hadn't noticed the shift in energy. This is a clear violation of protocol, she was insisting, her voice rising with frustration. I have 24 years of experience, and I'm telling you this passenger is non-compliant and should be removed. Alex, the gate agent, had gone completely pale. His eyes tracked Anthony's approach with the frozen fascination of someone watching an unstoppable force heading toward an immovable object. He'd seen the CEO once before at a company-wide meeting, but never this close, never in this context. Thomas. He whispered urgently, tugging at the supervisor's sleeve. He's here. Thomas turned, his expression morphing from frustration to shock to something close to panic in the span of seconds. Oh my God, he whispered instinctively, straightening his tie. That was when Veronica finally sensed the change around her. She turned, following the collective gaze of the crowd, and saw only a well-dressed black man approaching with purpose. No recognition flickered in her eyes, only irritation at yet another interruption. What she asked, irritated by the sudden silence. Who is that? No one answered her. They didn't need to. Anthony Reynolds had reached the edge of the gate area, and his eyes had found his daughter. Something passed between them, a silent communication built on years of shared understanding. Jasmine's shoulders relaxed infinitesimally, the barest hint of relief crossing her face. Then his gaze shifted to Veronica Palmer, taking her measure in one comprehensive glance. The air around them seemed to still, as if the entire gate area was collectively holding its breath. For a moment, Anthony simply observed, taking in the scene with calm assessment. Jasmine standing alone, clutching her bag. The officers maintaining a neutral distance. The crowd watching with anticipation. And Veronica still holding herself with rigid authority, though her expression had begun to show the first flickers of uncertainty. Anthony stepped forward, his movement deliberate and unhurried. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, yet carried effortlessly a perfect baritone that commanded attention without seeming to demand it. I believe there's a situation here that requires my attention. The words hung in the air, simple yet weighted with quiet authority. Anthony Reynolds stood at the edge of the gate area, one hand resting lightly on his leather portfolio, his gaze steady and evaluating. Veronica Palmer straightened her posture, sensing a new authority figure, but not yet comprehending who he was. She adopted her most professional tone. Sir, this is a boarding issue that's being handled by airline staff and airport police. I'm going to have to ask you to step back. Anthony's expression didn't change. He turned slightly toward Officer Lopez. Officer, would you mind explaining what's happening here? Before Officer Lopez could respond, Veronica cut in sharply. This doesn't concern you, sir. Please return to your gate. A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. Someone whispered, "Oh, she has no idea," followed by nervous laughter, quickly stifled. Anthony ignored Veronica and looked directly at Thomas, the gate supervisor. Mr. Wilson, isn't it? Perhaps you could bring me up to speed. Thomas's face had drained of color. He swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing visibly. Dr. Reynolds, sir. I didn't realize. That is, we have a situation with a non-compliant passenger, Veronica interrupted, clearly irritated that her authority was being undermined. She stepped forward, placing herself between Thomas and Anthony. She refused to check her oversized bag and became confrontational when instructed to do so. She's disrupting our boarding process and has been removed from this flight. Anthony nodded thoughtfully. I see. He turned to Jasmine. And what's your perspective on this? The bag fits in the sizer? Jasmine replied calmly, her voice steady. It contains my medication and laptop, which airline policy states should not be checked. I've shown that it's compliant, but Ms. Palmer has decided it isn't. And the bag in question? Anthony asked. Jasmine held up her green tote. Anthony turned back to Thomas. Has the bag been tested in the standard sizer? Thomas nodded nervously. Yes, sir. It does fit within the dimensions. Then I'm struggling to understand the issue, Anthony said, his voice remaining measured. If the bag meets SkyWing's published dimensions for a personal item, and it contains items that our policy explicitly states should remain in the cabin, why is my daughter being prevented from boarding? The word daughter sent another ripple through the crowd. Veronica's eyes widened slightly, the first flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Your daughter, she repeated, her voice losing some of its edge. Yes, Anthony replied simply. Jasmine Reynolds. I'm Dr. Anthony Reynolds. Veronica's expression suggested the name still meant nothing to her. Well, Dr. Reynolds, I'm sure you're very important in your field, but this is an airline matter, and as the senior crew member, as the chief executive officer and majority shareholder of SkyWing Airlines, Anthony interrupted, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. Now I believe this is very much my concern. The words landed like a thunderclap in the hushed gate area. Several passengers gasped. Someone whispered, "Holy shit." A few more phones rose to record what was quickly becoming a viral moment in the making. Veronica's mouth opened, then closed. Her face flushed, then drained of color in rapid succession as the full implications of Anthony's statement registered. Her eyes darted to his lapel pin, not just any company logo, but the executive version with its distinctive gold accents. She began, but couldn't seem to complete the thought, her voice trailing into silence. The CEO of SkyWing Airlines, Anthony, confirmed, his tone matter of fact. Now, perhaps you could explain to me why a passenger with a compliant bag containing medically necessary items is being denied boarding on one of my aircraft. The entire gate area had gone completely still. Even the background noise of the airport seemed to have faded away, as if the world itself was waiting for Veronica's response. Veronica's composure cracked. There must be some confusion. The bag appeared oversized from my perspective, and when the passenger argued or explained. Anthony asked, his eyes never leaving her face. She became confrontational. Veronica insisted, though, with less certainty. She refused to comply with my determination. Anthony turned to Officer Lopez. Officer, in your observation, was my daughter confrontational or disruptive? Officer Lopez shook her head. No, sir. She was insistent that her bag was compliant, which it appears to be, but she remained calm until the situation escalated. And who escalated it? Anthony asked, though it was clear he already knew the answer. Officer Lopez hesitated, glancing at Veronica. The situation became tense when Ms. Palmer called for police involvement. Anthony nodded thoughtfully. He turned back to Veronica, studying her name tag. Ms. Palmer, you've been with SkyWing for how long? 24 years? She replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her voice. Then you're certainly familiar with our core values and customer service policies, Anthony said. Perhaps you could point me to the specific policy that gives crew members the authority to override published baggage dimensions when a bag has been demonstrated to fit in the standard sizer. Veronica swallowed hard. It's a matter of crew discretion for safety and operational concerns. I see, Anthony said. And what specific safety or operational concern did this particular bag pose? Veronica had no answer. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Let me ask you something else, Miss Palmer. Anthony continued, his voice deceptively conversational. Would you have made the same determination if the passenger had been someone else? Someone who looked different from my daughter. The implication hung in the air. Veronica's face flushed again. That's an outrageous accusation. This has nothing to do with... I didn't make an accusation, Ms. Palmer. Anthony cut in smoothly. I asked a question, one that I'm still waiting for you to answer. The silence stretched uncomfortably. The fact is, Anthony continued when no answer came, you made a subjective determination that contradicted our published policy. You escalated a minor situation into a police matter. And most damning of all, you attempted to have a compliant passenger removed from a flight for doing nothing more than knowing and citing our own policies. He turned to Thomas. Mr. Wilson, as gate supervisor, did you verify whether Ms. Palmer's determination was in line with company policy? Thomas looked miserable. I should have checked more thoroughly, sir. Yes, you should have. Anthony agreed. His voice remained even, but there was no mistaking the disappointment. When a flight attendant attempts to remove a passenger, that decision should be reviewed, not rubber-stamped. He turned to address the entire gate area. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of SkyWing Airlines, I want to apologize for the delay and for the unprofessional conduct you've witnessed today. This is not how we train our staff to interact with our passengers. Not any of our passengers. The emphasis on the word any was slight but unmistakable. He turned back to Veronica. Ms. Palmer, I'm removing you from this flight. What? Veronica gasped, disbelief evident in her voice. You can't. I believe I can, Anthony replied calmly. And I am. You're suspended pending a full investigation of this incident and review of your service record. But the flight, she protested. We'll proceed with the rest of the crew. Anthony finished for her. I believe you have a reserve flight attendant on standby as per protocol. Thomas nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Dana Mitchell is in the crew lounge. Please call her to take over Ms. Palmer's duties, Anthony instructed. He turned back to Veronica. Please surrender your ID badge to Mr. Wilson and report to HR tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Veronica stood frozen, her face a mask of shock and humiliation. This is because she's your daughter, she managed finally. You're showing favoritism. Anthony's expression hardened for the first time. No, Ms. Palmer. This is because you failed to follow company policy, attempted to enforce rules that don't exist, escalated a minor situation into a police matter, and demonstrated precisely the kind of behavior that undermines everything this airline stands for. He leaned in slightly, his voice lower, but still audible to those nearby. The dignity of our passengers is not a discretionary matter. It is the foundation of our service. When you compromise that dignity, you compromise everything we represent. His eyes held hers for a long moment. The fact that you chose my daughter as your target merely ensures that I witnessed it personally rather than hearing about it secondhand. And make no mistake, if I discover this is part of a pattern, it won't just be this flight you lose. The threat was clear, measured, and delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who had both the authority and the will to follow through. You can't just fire someone for enforcing baggage rules, Veronica said, her voice rising in desperation. I'm not, Anthony replied. I'm suspending someone for abusing their authority, violating company policy, and treating a passenger with disrespect. The investigation will determine what happens next. He turned to Thomas. Please escort Ms. Palmer to the staff area and ensure the reserve flight attendant is called in. Then to Officer Barnes. Thank you for your assistance, officers. I believe the situation is now under control. As Veronica was led away, still protesting, Anthony turned to Jasmine. Are you all right? She nodded. I'm fine. Good. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, then addressed the watching crowd. Once again, I apologize for the delay. Boarding will resume momentarily, and as a small token of appreciation for your patience, everyone on this flight will receive a travel voucher for future use. The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement over what they had just witnessed. Several passengers pulled out phones, typing furiously tweets, texts, social media posts that would soon spread the story far beyond Gate B-23. Anthony Reynolds, CEO of SkyWing Airlines, had just demonstrated in the most public way possible that there were consequences for treating passengers with disrespect even when no one knew who was watching. The gate area at B-23 had transformed. What had been a scene of tension and confrontation just minutes earlier was now reorganizing itself with almost military precision under Anthony Reynolds' quiet direction. Veronica Palmer had been escorted to the staff area by security, her airline ID badge now in Thomas Wilson's trembling hand. The reserve flight attendant, Dana Mitchell, a cheerful woman in her 30s, had arrived and was helping resume the boarding process with professional efficiency. Anthony stood at the podium addressing the passengers who had witnessed the confrontation. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be resuming boarding momentarily. We appreciate your patience during this delay. As compensation for the inconvenience, everyone on this flight will receive a $200 travel voucher for future travel on SkyWing. Our gate agents will be emailing those to you automatically." The crowd's reaction was mixed, some impressed by the swift resolution and compensation, others still processing what they had witnessed. Several passengers were furiously texting or posting to social media, their thumbs flying across screens. The hashtag #SkyWingCEO was already beginning to trend locally. Officer Barnes and Officer Lopez had stepped back, their services no longer required. Quite a turn of events, Barnes commented quietly to his partner. Officer Lopez nodded, and not a moment too soon. That situation was heading somewhere ugly fast. She glanced at Anthony, who was now speaking quietly with Thomas. Not often you see a CEO get his hands dirty like that, or take their own policies that seriously. Barnes agreed. Most would have just offered the kid a voucher and moved on. Near the boarding lane, Elaine Fisher, the retired teacher who had defended Jasmine, approached her with a warm smile. "Well, that was something I've waited a long time to see," she said, patting Jasmine's arm. "Your father is quite remarkable." "Thank you," Jasmine replied, still clutching her green tote. "And thank you for speaking up earlier. Not many people would have." "More should," Elaine replied simply. "When you've taught high school for as long as I did, you learn to recognize when someone's being singled out unfairly." She glanced toward Anthony. "But it helps when the cavalry arrives, doesn't it?" Jasmine smiled slightly. "Sometimes." Alex Ramirez stood at the boarding gate, scanning tickets with nervous efficiency, his eyes occasionally darting toward Anthony, who was now speaking quietly with Thomas. Alex had witnessed something career-defining today, both what to do and what never to do in airline customer service. His mind was racing. He'd nearly kept silent, nearly let Veronica railroad an innocent passenger because he was worried about his probationary status. The thought made him feel slightly sick. Thomas looked shell-shocked, nodding repeatedly as Anthony spoke to him. "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. I understand completely. It won't happen again, sir." Anthony turned away from Thomas and approached his daughter. For the first time since arriving, his professional mask softened slightly. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Jasmine nodded. "I'm fine. Just tired and ready to be home. We'll talk more later," he promised. "I'm going to make some calls. There are things that need to be addressed immediately." As passengers began reforming their boarding lines, many were watching the father-daughter interaction with new interest, connecting dots and reshaping their understanding of what they'd witnessed. Richard Gonzalez, the impatient businessman who had told Jasmine to just check the bag, approached hesitantly Dr. Reynolds. "I want to apologize for my comments earlier. I was frustrated about my connection, but that's no excuse." Anthony studied him briefly, then nodded. "Thank you for that, Mr. Gonzalez." "Richard Gonzalez." "Mr. Gonzalez." I appreciate your candor. We'll make sure you make your connection in San Francisco." Richard looked surprised, then grateful. "Thank you." Meanwhile, a ripple was moving through the terminal as word spread. Other SkyWing employees at nearby gates were straightening uniforms, checking procedures, suddenly aware that the CEO was in the building and paying very close attention to customer interactions. On the far side of the gate area, Anthony pulled out his phone and dialed. "Claire. It's Anthony. I need the executive team assembled for an emergency video call in 30 minutes. Yes, including legal and HR. We have a situation that needs immediate attention." He listened briefly, then continued. "Also, I want every customer service incident involving baggage disputes or boarding denials for the past 6 months pulled for review, and get me Veronica Palmer's complete personnel file." Another pause. "Because we may have just discovered the tip of a very problematic iceberg, and I want to know how deep it goes." As he ended the call, Anthony noticed several passengers openly recording him with their phones. Rather than objecting, he nodded slightly in acknowledgement. Transparency would be essential in what was to come. He returned to where Jasmine was waiting in the premium boarding line. "Your flight should be departing soon. I've asked them to leave the seat next to you open so you can be more comfortable." "You don't have to do that," Jasmine said quickly. "I don't want special treatment." Anthony smiled slightly. "It's not special treatment. It's an airline CEO making sure a passenger who was just subjected to a stressful confrontation has some space to decompress. I'd do the same for any passenger in your situation." Jasmine didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded. "Are you flying back with me?" Anthony shook his head. "I need to stay and deal with this, but I'll be home tomorrow and we'll talk then." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "I'm proud of how you handled yourself today. You kept your composure in a situation where many wouldn't have." "I had a good teacher," Jasmine replied with a small smile. As the boarding announcement came over the PA system, Anthony stepped back once again, the professional CEO rather than the concerned father. "Safe travels," he said. "We'll talk tomorrow." Jasmine nodded, handed her boarding pass to Alex, and walked down the jet bridge, her green tote bag securely in hand. Behind her, the wheels of accountability had already begun to turn. The sleek corporate jet touched down at San Francisco International Airport just after 9 p.m., 3 hours after SkyWing Flight 835 had arrived. Anthony Reynolds disembarked, his suit still crisp despite the long day, his expression thoughtful but resolved. The confrontation at Gate B23 had set in motion a series of events that had consumed his afternoon and would likely reshape his airline. His driver was waiting on the tarmac. "Straight home, sir?" the man asked, taking Anthony's briefcase. "Yes, James. It's been a long day." During the drive to his Pacific Heights home, Anthony reflected on the emergency executive meeting he'd called from Atlanta. The initial shock on his leadership team's faces when he detailed the incident had quickly given way to deep concern, not just about one flight attendant's behavior, but about what it potentially revealed about their corporate culture. "This isn't an isolated incident," Claire Johnson, his chief operating officer, had stated with grim certainty. If Palmer felt comfortable enough to do this, especially to a passenger who challenged her, there are almost certainly other cases we don't know about. The preliminary review of Veronica Palmer's personnel file had confirmed that suspicion. 7 customer complaints in the past 18 months, all handled and dismissed by her direct supervisor with minimal documentation. The pattern was unmistakable. 5 of the 7 complainants were people of color, and all involved disputed interpretations of baggage or boarding policies. As the car pulled into the driveway of his home, Anthony saw lights on in the kitchen. Jasmine was still awake, waiting for him. She was at the kitchen island textbook, open cup of tea, cooling beside her. She looked up when he entered, her expression a mixture of relief and lingering tension. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, sweetheart." Anthony set down his briefcase and loosened his tie. "How are you doing?" Jasmine shrugged. "Better now that I'm home." She hesitated. What happened after I left? Anthony poured himself a glass of water before sitting across from her. Veronica Palmer has been suspended pending investigation. But that's just the beginning. What do you mean we pulled her file? There's a pattern, Jasmine. Several complaints, all suspiciously similar to your experience, all dismissed by her supervisor. He shook his head. And it gets worse. We've initiated a review of all similar incidents across the airline. The preliminary numbers aren't good. So it's not just her, Jasmine said quietly. No, it's a cultural issue. One that I should have been more aware of. Anthony's expression was solemn. I've always believed that building good systems would prevent bad behavior. But systems are only as good as the people implementing them, and somewhere along the line we developed blind spots. It's not your fault, Dad. As CEO, it absolutely is. Anthony's tone was firm but not defensive. The culture of any organization reflects its leadership. If SkyWing has a discrimination problem, then I have a discrimination problem. Jasmine studied her father's face. So what happens now? Now we fix it. Not with press releases and empty promises, but with structural change. Anthony took a sip of water. First, Veronica Palmer is terminated effective tomorrow. Her supervisor as well for failing to address the pattern of complaints. We're bringing in an independent firm to conduct a comprehensive review of our customer service practices, with a particular focus on how frontline staff exercise discretion in policy enforcement. That sounds like a good start, Jasmine said cautiously. It's only a start, Anthony agreed. We're also implementing immediate changes to our baggage policy to remove subjective assessments if it fits in the sizer, it flies, period. And we're creating a new customer advocacy department that reports directly to the executive level outside the normal chain of command. He paused, then added, and we're going to make this public. No hiding behind NDAs or confidential settlements. Full transparency about what happened, why it happened, and what we're doing to ensure it never happens again. Jasmine looked surprised. That's not how most companies handle these things. Most companies are more concerned with protecting their image than fixing their problems, Anthony replied. I didn't build SkyWing to be like most companies. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the day settling around them. I'm sorry you had to experience that, Anthony finally said. I'm not, Jasmine replied, surprising him. Not entirely. It was humiliating and infuriating, yes. But if it hadn't happened to me, if it had happened to someone who didn't have a direct line to the CEO, nothing would have changed. At least this way, maybe something good comes from it. Anthony studied his daughter's face, seeing in it not just his own features, but his late wife's strength. When did you get so wise? I had good teachers, she replied with a small smile. She set her tea down, fingers tracing the rim of the cup thoughtfully. You know what the worst part was? It wasn't the embarrassment or the frustration. It was watching everyone just accept it. Like it was normal for someone to be treated that way. Not everyone, Anthony pointed out. That woman in the pink Elaine, she spoke up. One person out of dozens, Jasmine countered. And even then, it didn't change anything until you arrived. Anthony nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in her words. That's the hardest part of all this. For every incident, we see how many go unchallenged. How many passengers accept mistreatment because they don't have the resources or energy to fight it. Outside, a notification chimed on Anthony's phone. He glanced at it briefly. The video is spreading. Over 2 million views already across platforms. Jasmine winced. Great. I'll be recognized on campus. For standing up to injustice with dignity. There are worse things to be known for, I guess. She hesitated. Dad, what if it had been someone else? Someone who wasn't your daughter? The question hung between them, uncomfortable but necessary. I want to believe I would have responded the same way Anthony said after a long moment. That our systems would have caught it, that justice would have prevailed. But I don't know that for certain. And that's what keeps me awake at night. The kitchen fell quiet again, father and daughter, sitting together in the aftermath of a day that had changed them both. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, media inquiries, legal considerations, the complex work of institutional change. But for tonight, they were simply a family processing a shared experience that had revealed hard truths about the world they navigated together. You know, Jasmine said, eventually I kept thinking about what you've always told me, about staying calm, knowing the rules better than they do. And did it help? She considered the question seriously. Yes and no. It helped me keep my composure mostly. But it didn't stop what was happening until you showed up. She looked directly at him. And most people don't have that option. Anthony nodded slowly. That's why the system has to change, so that dignity and justice don't depend on who your parents are or who you know. Is that really possible? Honestly, I don't know. But I do know we have a responsibility to try. Anthony reached across the island and squeezed his daughter's hand. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day for both of us. The fluorescent lights of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport's retail concourse flickered, casting a sickly, buzzing glow across the small gift shop tucked between gates. The air here was different from the main terminal, a sad, stale mixture of industrial carpet cleaner coffee and passenger fatigue. Behind the counter of terminal treasures, Veronica Palmer arranged a display of Atlanta snow globes with mechanical precision. Her once immaculate uniform was gone, replaced by an ill-fitting blue polo shirt with the shop's logo embroidered on the chest. Her blonde bob, once a helmet of corporate authority, had grown out dark roots showing through the fading color. 3 months had transformed her life completely. The termination, the viral infamy, the lost pension, the mounting legal fees, all of it cascading from a single confrontation over a green tote bag. The SkyWing name that had once opened doors now slammed them shut as potential employers recognized her from the video that wouldn't die. In her darker moments, which came frequently, Veronica blamed everyone but herself, the airline, for making her a scapegoat, Anthony Reynolds for abusing his power, Jasmine for not simply complying with her instructions. She had been made an example of her 24 years of service erased by a single incident. But in rare moments of clarity, usually in the quiet hours before sleep, Veronica acknowledged truths she couldn't bring herself to speak aloud, that there had been other incidents before this one, that she had applied rules differently depending on who stood before her, that she had wielded her authority as a weapon rather than a responsibility. The shop door chimed, pulling her from her thoughts. A young black woman about 19 or 20 walked in, phone pressed to her ear, laughing at something someone had said. She wore a Howard University sweatshirt, her braids gathered in a casual bun atop her head. Veronica straightened customer service mode, activating automatically, though without the crisp professionalism that had once defined her. "Welcome to Terminal Treasures," she recited in the flat monotone that had replaced her once authoritative tone. The young woman smiled briefly in acknowledgement before returning to her call, browsing the snack section as she spoke. "No, I've got a 3-hour layover." "Yeah, I know." The conference was amazing, though. Something about her reminded Veronica of Jasmine Reynolds, not physically, but in her manner, her comfortable confidence, the way she moved through the world assuming she belonged in it. The very thing that had triggered Veronica's worst instincts 3 months ago. The young woman ended her call and approached the counter with a bottle of water and a granola bar. As she set them down, a small glittering keychain fell from her pocket, landing silently on the floor beside the register, unseen by its owner. "Just these, please," she said, smiling politely. Veronica rang up the items mechanically. 7.85s. As the young woman paid, Veronica noticed the fallen keychain, a miniature Howard University logo sparkling under the fluorescent lights. A voice in her head, bitter and resentful, whispered, Let her lose it. She should pay more attention to her things. Serves her right. It was the same voice that had guided so many of her interactions over the years, the voice that categorized people as worthy or unworthy of consideration, based on criteria she'd never fully examined. The young woman collected her items and turned to leave. Veronica stared at the keychain on the floor. It represented a choice, the same choice she'd made countless times before, but this time with the weight of everything she'd lost pressing upon her. She could be the person who let the young woman walk away, taking a tiny, secret, bitter victory in someone else's minor misfortune. Or she could be someone else, someone she perhaps should have been all along. Miss Veronica called, her voice cracking slightly with disuse. The young woman turned back, eyebrows raised in question. Veronica bent down her back, protesting after hours of standing, and picked up the small, sparkly trinket. She held it out, palm open. "You dropped this." The young woman's face lit up with genuine relief and gratitude. "Oh my God, thank you so much," she exclaimed, hurrying back to the counter. "My sister just gave me this last week. It's my good luck charm for finals." She took the keychain, her fingers briefly brushing Veronica's palm. "Seriously, thank you. You're a lifesaver." The simple, sincere gratitude for such a small act of basic decency hit Veronica with unexpected force. This young woman saw her, really saw her not as an obstacle or an authority figure, but simply as another human being who had done something kind. "You're welcome, Veronica," replied the words, feeling strange and unfamiliar in her mouth. As the young woman left, smiling and reattaching the keychain to her phone case, Veronica stood motionless behind the counter. Through the shop window, she could see a SkyWing Airlines plane taxiing toward the runway, its logo gleaming in the afternoon sun. She would never again wear that uniform or wield that authority. Her career, her status, her identity as the experienced, respected senior flight attendant, all of it was gone, replaced by this small shop and the humble task of selling overpriced souvenirs to hurried travelers. But in that moment of simple human connection, of choosing kindness over bitterness, Veronica Palmer felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. The quiet satisfaction of having done the right thing, not because of rules or authority or fear of consequences, but simply because it was right. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just a small moment of grace in a life that had been fundamentally altered by her own actions. But perhaps it was a beginning, not of a return to what had been, but of a different way forward. Outside, the SkyWing plane lifted off, climbing steadily into the clear blue Georgia sky, carrying hundreds of passengers who would never know the story of how a confrontation at a gate had transformed not just an airline, but the lives of everyone involved. And somewhere in that sky, dignity and respect had become not just corporate values on a website, but living principles, guiding thousands of daily interactions. Proof that sometimes meaningful change begins with a single moment of truth, when someone finally decides that enough is enough, and that a different way is possible. If you found this story inspiring, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about dignity, justice, and transformation. Your support helps us share these important messages with more people. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss our new uploads. Thanks for watching.